Okay, welcome everybody. My name is James Nascorn. I should just give you just an initial introduction here. My name is James Nascorn. I head up the data governance practice over at Data Meaning. I have been, working in the self-service and enterprise analytics space for some time, and then, of course, really just the less sexier side of analytics around data management, data governance, master data management for a number of years, prior to that. So I have a fun agenda today. Let's just call it fun. Ultimately, what I want to do is dig into some of the concepts of what I typically refer to as self-service governance. Some refer to it as analytics governance. And ultimately, what that is as many organizations are really starting to, evolve into data-driven organizations or insights-driven organizations, they're looking to empower their business front lines with the tooling, the knowledge, and the access to the right data in order to ultimately answer their own questions. And the promise of self-service is quite compelling, largely because, as you can imagine, with very large organizations, with very disparate, often siloed departments, the challenge that central organizations like IT or BI Center of Excellence have is trying to scale the assets or the use of data or the derivation of insights in order to make their own decisions. And the scaling part is often tricky unless, of course, you hire a massive army and you're willing to spend on that huge army and a pretty significant infrastructure to support. Or alternatively, you empower the vast majority of your organization who have subject matter expertise around specific domains and enable them to do much of the exploration and analysis, and then potentially even review of insights and action on those insights. So we can get into that a little bit, but ultimately, what comes with self-service analytics is an imbalance of heavy use of tooling, access to data, and what people commonly refer to as the wild, wild west is, generally gaining access to data when they shouldn't, or that they are ultimately building their own reports, dashboards, analytic assets to serve their own needs when there is plenty of similar assets sitting out there in the organization that just don't know about it. So yeah, redundancy is a big one. Lack of standards and control, standards around, sort of best practices of building your analytic assets in the right way, but then control around, access to data, who has permission to utilize certain data sets for certain analytic purposes. And, prior to self-service analytics, there was a general sense of control, largely because these controls were central. They were centralized with IT, and you went through a very typical SDLC type process where your IT folks were intaking requests from the business, listening to their requirements around a dashboard to be built, ultimately turning around and building that dashboard, and then delivering it back out to the business. So what we're really talking about with self-service is much more of a federated type model. There's always going to be some central component around your organization, but it is the idea that now you have empowered a significant number of people with pretty powerful tools, tools that are going to gain access to key strategic parts of the organization, and that there needs to be some visibility, transparency to one, what those tools are, two, what is being built, and three, what data sources are being accessed as a result. All right, so ultimately that's the current state. And what we want to do is talk about some tips and tricks, some best practices to get control. There are a number of tools, and there are a number of processes that can be put into play to ensure that we get that level of balance. And it needs to start somewhere. Ultimately, I feel like a lot of organizations get overwhelmed by the idea that there needs to be some level of governance in play. The governance, a governance program in general can overwhelm just about anybody as they start to think about, the sort of concepts of governance and the idea that, ultimately you need to put a program in place. You're going to spend tons of money. You're going to spend months, delivering on this, and then only until you've done that, you're going to get value from it. Well, that's really not the case here, and this is where I want to, set it straight by saying that there are some simple steps, some simple actionable steps that can be taken today to ensure that we get that balance around our self-service analytics. And then for those who are maybe not in the know, but I'm guessing that if anybody has signed up to review this webinar, they probably have a pretty good sense of what self-service analytics is. Just to throw out some typical platform names, Tableau was really one of the first, right? And Alteryx is another really good example of self-service. Intuitive platforms, doesn't take really much to be up and running with some simple tools to both access and then transform your data and then output, perhaps to another consuming application or to an Excel spreadsheet. And a lot of these are really ultimately sort of replacing what your typical data worker in the past has been using, which is an Excel spreadsheet for business analysis or for even data analysis. And of course, Excel on its own has its limitations, and people have been facing pains with Excel in the past for many of the same reasons, right? Is that a lot of the development is local. There's no clarity or transparency around who's doing what. There is trust that whatever analysis is being performed is against the appropriate, endorsed, certified data source, and then ultimately it's being shared. It is being saved off in a accessible location to ensure reuse. So how do we get to the bottom of this? If we want to get control, or if we want to get just a better sense of some safeguards and guardrails around our self-service, we first need to better understand what those assets are. And by that, I mean, any organization could be maybe a couple of months in, or they could be a couple of years into their self-service initiative, and ultimately have built out already a pretty significant number of assets. By assets, I mean curated data sets. I mean analytic workflows, Tableau reports, Power BI reports, Click reports, anything that's going to provide some analytic insights for members of your organization to make decisions off of. And really, from the get-go, there needs to be some level of knowledge, some level of training or understanding of each individual who is empowered with a license to any one of these platforms is an understanding of what is the value, what are you looking to achieve with these tools. Do you have a set of specific business use cases for which you have a quantifiable set of maybe KPIs or some acceptance criteria that is going to ensure that you as an individual get one, extracting as much value from these tools as possible, but then two, there is some clarity and some structure around the assets that you're building that are then going to provide value, maybe initially to you as a individual data worker, and that could be around exploration, but then most importantly, value to the broader organization. And by that, I mean, you might have a data analyst or you might have a data scientist, all of whom are looking to perform some level of manipulation, transformation around your data, output to a set of assets. And these could also include, your AI machine learning models. It could be out to certain web apps. It could just be out to some central shared location for ease of reuse for other data analysts or data scientists to essentially adopt the same assets versus essentially starting from scratch, reinventing the wheel. So I'm throwing out a few ideas here. The first one being, as these licenses are offered up, there needs to be a level of education, not just around the tool, not just training around the tool, but there needs to be a level of education in terms of understanding what they're empowered with and what the opportunities are, not just for that individual, not just for the department, but then for the organization as a whole. And then this is where you can get into thinking about a data and analytics community and centralizing the idea of the power users, the champions, those individuals who are working on solutionizing around specific gaps or questions and building out maybe common solutions that can be either adapted to other individuals' needs or can be utilized by a individual who has no license but needs to essentially see the outputs, see the ultimate insights coming from, say, a dashboard in order to utilize for their own decision making. So really understanding what is that vision, what are those use cases, how can you centralize to ensure that you have clarity and collaboration that spans across departments, spans enterprise-wide, and setting up a data and analytics community is an excellent way of starting to share best practices, of starting to share new solutions as they are published, of helping individuals understand the standards around and the best ways to utilize these tools in order to quickly derive business value from them. So we have potentially two challenges that can really on the sort of opposite ends of the scale that can stem from the self-service analytics initiatives. One is the overuse that I spoke to, which is then you've got individuals who are empowered with these tools and just really want to try to access as much data as they can, perhaps misinterpreting that data, not really understanding the outputs that they're seeing, maybe not cognizant of the idea that there might be some sensitive data that they are not privileged to, and then essentially building out assets one after the other to serve their own curiosity, maybe being innovative and exploring, but ultimately not serving any larger end business goal or end purpose. So it's that idea of community, collaboration, clarity around other individuals who are equally empowered, who have gone through a certain set of training, who understand the tool, understand how to derive answers from their data, who understand, where the data sources lie, the strategic, trusted data sources that are certified and endorsed by your organization, and who then understand really some of the best practices and the process with which you should be carefully building these assets to ensure that you're meeting the minimum standards and requirements around those outputs, around how much those assets can be shared, and around how much collaboration can happen around those assets. So now let's just get into the tooling component for a second. So we talked a little bit about people and talked a little bit about process. From a tooling perspective, one of the best opportunities, and now I'm going to get into something very specific around Alteryx Connect, because that's ultimately where the agenda specifically has been for this webinar. But I will get into other future concepts, or at least to talk about other technologies as well that can benefit from this. Is I'm going to get into the concept of a data catalog. Now, a data catalog is, I'm going to say, it's a relatively new entrant to the modern data stack. Although data catalogs have been around for a significant number of years, it really has only been in recent months and years that larger organizations have woken up to the idea that there needs to be some level of transparency and some level of structure with which you have a broader number of data consumers and data producers who now need clarity around their the endorsed data that they should be accessing, and understanding whether there are assets that exist that they could be leveraging versus building from scratch. And that in itself creates a significant number of efficiencies. So the idea around around really any data catalog, really the value that anybody is going to extract from a data catalog is the idea of data discoverability, the idea of context, the idea of trust, and then ultimately the idea of reuse. And if a data catalog can achieve every one of those elements and can achieve it in a scalable way, then we have a lot of success with inching towards those safeguards and controls as it pertains to the self-service initiatives. So let's go through a scenario. We've got organization ABC. They have, let's just say a couple of years ago, purchased an enterprise-wide license of Alteryx. They now have 150 designer licenses in play across a number of different departments: sales, marketing, finance are the typical ones, but it could be operations, it could be HR. A significant number of departments are really taking advantage of and excited about the idea of eliminating the middleman and getting, basically building out the answers for themselves and being innovative, really providing true value, not just to the department, but the opportunity to provide value and have ownership around valuable assets for the organization as a whole. So these 150 designer licenses are spread evenly across all of these different departments. You have marketing, who are building out a pretty significant number of analytic models or reports, like a customer churn report. They're already extracting a good deal of value for themselves from those reports. But then you have folks over in sales who are also tapping into customer data because they have an interest in better understanding, also the propensity for a customer, an existing customer, to buy as their needs evolve over time. Then you've got finance is also perhaps interested in understanding information around revenue. They would also be interested in better understanding when there is churn and when they can predict churn, so they can better understand if there are are triggers, levers that can be pulled to to better forecast subscriptions. That's all great. What tends to happen is that, again, you've got an individual accessing customers from one database, perhaps a database that has been sort of grown over time and nurtured, specifically by the finance team for their analytic purposes. You have another set of individuals who are building out their own analytic models and insights off of potentially another customer database. It could actually be even off of a Salesforce application, and there could be multiple instances of those Salesforce applications maintaining most likely many of the same customers, but all within different instances. So ultimately, duplication there, and very little control around who's accessing what data for what purposes. So there's no opportunity for ultimately taking one gold copy, one version of the truth around your customers, and ensuring that every individual, whether they sit in finance or sales or marketing, are all accessing that same database, that same data source, the curated data set. And the reason for that is largely because of having been in silos. There has been really sort of this need to be self-sufficient, and this sort of level of shadow take, if you will, that has individuals finding or circumventing processes, central processes, in order to get or produce the results that they are under pressure to produce off of the information that they simply have access to. Instead, what a catalog does is it really shines a light on all of the, first and foremost, all of the disparate assets and their outputs that exist across the organization, whether in finance or marketing, sales, HR. And they do that by enabling very quickly to have these loaders. In the case of Alteryx, it's a metadata loader. You point that metadata loader to any data source or any ETL platform, and you essentially run that. It's an analytic app that will then interrogate that data source, pull back all necessary metadata, and essentially push that metadata right into Alteryx's catalog, Alteryx Connect. And then grabbing that metadata will give you that insight that you need around your data and around your assets that you have built up over time across the organization. Now, the opportunity here is that in the case of Alteryx, and certainly in the case of Tableau and Power BI, there is this concept of a central server for sharing of assets. So in the case of Alteryx, it's Alteryx Gallery. And Alteryx Gallery provides this initial opportunity for individuals across the organization to publish their workflows, which gives everybody who has access to the gallery an opportunity to see what other workflows exist. So Alteryx had already anticipated the idea that one, we want a level of collaboration and community around our tool, around our platform. We want to ensure that, if someone's producing a customer churn report or even a customer revenue report from one side of the organization, that the other side of the organization could potentially log into some central location and then find that, and then reach out to the owner of that asset and see if they can leverage it for their own purposes, or even just ask some simple questions. What Alteryx did is then take that a step further by offering up another element or another component to their platform, Alteryx Connect, which will then take all of the very useful insights and information that can be gleaned from the Alteryx gallery. And by that, I mean, it's pulling back information around every workflow that's published into the gallery. It's pulling back information around who the owners are of those workflows, pulling back information around the tools that are being utilized, the macros and so forth. And I'll show you that in a second. And then it puts that into a central repository that's nicely indexed to make it extremely discoverable, searchable, so that ultimately you can find the information that you're looking for in a very, very short period of time. Now, Alteryx Gallery ultimately presents all of those assets in that one central location, which makes it then easy for Alteryx Connect to run a metadata loader against Gallery and then pull in all of that very useful information. Now, I do need to throw out a disclaimer there that you're always going to have pockets of the organization where you have individuals with Alteryx licenses who may be building out their own exploratory analytics locally on their own machine and are never saving off or publishing workflows to your gallery. This then goes back to education and process and ensuring that you have the right measures in place and the right clarity around your processes to ensure that anytime somebody is empowered with a license to that platform, that they understand what their responsibility is and what they're accountable for as they're building out insights around your organization's data. And so there are opportunities then, of course, to monitor license use, understand who's active in using their licenses, and then potentially revoke or further educate those who are not utilizing their licenses appropriately. And one of those just simply might be, as you're producing analytics that are benefiting your department or your organization as a whole, that you are publishing them out to the gallery. But as soon as it gets out to the gallery, Alteryx Connect does not discriminate around certain workflows within the gallery. You simply point the Connect metadata loader to Alteryx Gallery, and then you run that. You can run it one time. You can set it up on a schedule, which of course is leveraging Alteryx Server Gallery. Set up on a schedule and then allow that metadata loader to run on a recurring basis, maybe once every week, once every month, so that there is this continual refresh of metadata that comes into Connect that's going to give you insights around the workflows that are being produced and that are being potentially sort of regularly utilized. You're going to get those insights. And as I said, I'll get into that in a second. Same concept with Tableau, same concept with Power BI or any of your other reporting platforms, is that you essentially also have this reporting catalog. So you've got an opportunity, and you can see it up here in the menu on Alteryx Connect, is that you can essentially create this, you can actually utilize a out-of-the-box supported Tableau metadata loader, point it to your Tableau server or your Tableau online. Essentially, same thing, same concept again. It's a central location where individuals are publishing their workbooks and ultimately their reports and dashboards. and they're utilizing data sources maybe that live on Tableau, or perhaps they're utilizing central data sources within your data environment. And those reports and dashboards are, again, it's accessible by individuals beyond just those who produce them, so data consumers. And again, there is an opportunity to do some, let's call it some simple searching within Tableau to find, certain reports to avoid, redundancy, to avoid ultimately building similar reports from scratch and creating, somewhat of a swamp of assets that are benefiting some but not all, or that are redundant, and where organization and cleanup can produce significant efficiencies, but then can also really seriously declutter and create better clarity around key assets that are strategic. So that's Tableau, that's Alteryx. Let's get into this for a second. So Alteryx Connect, at a high level, we have these simple tiles that indicate specific locations of different types of assets. And at the highest level, there's really 4 types of assets that are ingested, indexed, and displayed for purposes of discoverability and transparency. The first is your Alteryx workflows. The second are your reports. The third, your data sources, and we can drill into that a little bit. And then the fourth, your business glossary. So where you can tie in your standards, your business terms, perhaps to build out your business terms across your taxonomy, and then start to relate those business terms back out to your assets. But that's for another time. I'm not going to really get into business glossary today. These 5th and 6th tiles really then just get more around the organization of your users within the catalog, and then an opportunity for really saved searches. That's what virtual folders are, so that as individuals are searching for specific assets within the catalog, if they find themselves coming back in and regularly searching for those types of assets, then they can build a virtual folder around it. So for ease of just getting back to those assets each and every time. Okay, so I promised that I would talk about how we can very quickly understand your popular data sources across your assets. So let's just dig into that for a second. So as I said, the concept is you would run your metadata loader against your Alteryx gallery. Now, after running that metadata loader, it's going to come back with ultimately the Alteryx workflows and the information around those Alteryx workflows in a list format, potentially grouped by either by collections, potentially grouped by instances of gallery. So as an example, you might have organizations, and this is a growing need, of course, when we get into data ops and talking about promotion of workflows from dev, pre-prod environment over to prod. Again, this is really talking more into the responsibilities and the processes around ensuring that we have only endorsed, only certified, trusted data that is carefully governed, that is feeding production-like assets that are then in turn informing individuals across the organization so that they can make core decisions. And so it becomes more and more necessary as organizations step up their self-service analytics footprint to ensure that they have those kinds of controls and measures in place. And that all also gets into analytics governance. So right here in my demo, I only have one gallery. I have one instance, but there are opportunities for you to point the Alteryx metadata loader to multiple galleries. So I could have a prod, I could have a pre-prod. There could be different galleries for for different departments. It really just sort of depends on how you want to architect your Alteryx footprint across your organization for, I'm sure, a variety of reasons why you might want to split out those galleries. But regardless, when it comes to a data catalog, when it comes to getting an understanding around the assets and where they live across the organization, is you want to make that as transparent and as visible, as accessible as possible. Now, always keep in mind too that the information that's displayed within Alteryx Connect is just metadata. There is no access to, and there is no visibility to specific data, tables, columns, the values that reside within Alteryx Connect. So, if we delineate that, and if we help everybody understand that the purpose of the catalog is to enable that transparency and discoverability around your trusted data sources, then it's a better practice to try to keep access to and visibility to your data catalog and the data sources and assets within as open as possible. That's not necessarily always the case. Sometimes you might want to look at controlling accessibility to, or even visibility to, assets by specific groups, and that's okay too. There is the ability to provide much more granular permissioning within the catalog, so that you could corral a certain set of assets. Let's just say that within your gallery, you might have a specific set of collections, and then those collections you might have some very sensitive data that you don't want individuals even knowing exists within the organization, in which case then you can you can drill into that information, and you can then utilize permissioning right at the asset page at the parent level, and then apply permissioning for a specific group or an individual, if you will. And then once that permissioning is in place, let's just say only provide read access to the to the like the health department for your healthcare collected Alteryx workflows, then that ultimately eliminates visibility for every other user within Connect, with the exception of that one group. All right, I'm going to go back up to the analytic workflows for a second. So what do we see? So when we first ingest the metadata from our Alteryx gallery, we're going to be fronted with just ultimately as a start, some very valuable information that is discovered within Alteryx gallery itself. So before anything else is done, we immediately get information. By immediate, I mean automatically get information directly from the metadata loader. So I haven't actually touched this particular asset, this particular Alteryx workflow came in from our Alteryx gallery. Now, there was no description and no synonyms. In cases where, as a practice, you have your designer licensees who are applying descriptions to their workflows, those descriptions will come in as a discovered description. So those will come in automatically as well. And then you can get into better understanding other details, like what studio did it come from? The type of workflow it is. So it could be just a straight up workflow, it could be an analytic app, number of times it's run, etc., versions, even right down to the app engines being utilized. Then we can also get into some really, really useful information. So we're going to start to dig into that in a second. I want to just put some attention to the far right of this. And again, I can't stress enough that for every organization that utilizes Alteryx heavily today, and they have a reasonable number of Alteryx designer licenses where people are producing their outputs and then publishing them to their gallery, that there is a real opportunity to get this level of transparency across every one of your workflows. So other information that is gleaned as that asset is indexed within the catalog is popularity. So it's going to very quickly apply a popularity score or rating to every asset that sits within Connect. And so each Alteryx workflow is no different. It utilizes really sort of a mix of a number of variables within the algorithm, there's sort of amount of activity, how many likes, dislikes, the number of people that have viewed it, etc. Even number of versions in the case of Alteryx workflows, but then in the case of data sources, it could be also relationships that have been applied, across those data sources. So very quick way of ascertaining whether or not that asset or the data source is popular. Another is the owner. Now, this is incredibly useful in the case where we get into collaboration, where there are questions, where there's feedback, or whether there are specific tasks that need to be applied to certain assets or data sources. Then having ownership means that there is ultimately somebody who's responsible for and accountable for that asset, so that there is a point of contact for others around the organization to reach out to. But then also there's this opportunity to notify that individual should something change around that asset, or importantly, if there should be a data source that's feeding that asset that has changed, and now that asset itself has potentially been compromised, we also want opportunities to notify that individual so that they can then review the change and determine if anything needs to be adjusted around the asset, in this case around an Alteryx workflow. And then we have opportunities for individuals then to apply their own knowledge. So this is the idea of collaboration and tribal knowledge. There's no one individual who has subject matter expertise across every department, across every every capability, every product, every bit of information that exists within your organization. So the idea is that you really need to crowdsource that information and bring it into one sort of central dynamic repository, so that one, it offloads the burden of each of those individuals, those specialists who have clear expertise in one area, so whether it's around a table or curated data set, or whether it's around a workflow, so that that information can very quickly be gleaned without having to bother the owner, without having to sort of walk over and tap that person's shoulder. Instead, you've got that information right in front of you. So then it's on that subject matter expert to then, or that owner, to then provide more information directly on that asset within the catalog, to offload their knowledge to ensure that people have the kind of understanding and context that they need to get on with their own projects, which might well mean, okay, I see append a calculated field. You know what, that sounds like something that I might be interested in. Now, if Talis had provided a description, and if there had been a number of additional things like perhaps tags, or perhaps just some sort of further information around metrics that are being produced, perhaps relationships to other outputs, reports and so forth, then ultimately I, who may or may not know Talis, or who certainly is coming in looking for a workflow and then finding what looks to be in the ballpark of what I need, I can then make my own determination without then having to go out and set other meetings, or spend time tapping shoulders to get the information I need. All right, so we've got information around the workflow. Now, really importantly, we also get information around all of the tools that were utilized by that workflow. So we've got a small number of tools for this particular workflow, but it's still giving us some insight then into the tools that are being utilized maybe by this one individual, but then you can kind of pivot by looking at one tool and then getting perspective around how many other assets are leveraging that same tool. I can do that by, oops, if it lets me click on it. And now as I put my focus around this append fields tool, I can now see just how many other workflows within data meaning itself, so off of our demo platform, that are referencing this tool in order to manipulate, transform your data. Okay, so go back for a second. So as you imagine, you can do this with every one of these tools. Now, some tools are going to be used more heavily than others, but then this is going to then give further insight to your central team or even to your community. It's going to give you insight to those tools that are heavily utilized and perhaps are providing some level of efficiency that it could benefit other individuals across the organization by using more heavily than perhaps sort of alternative tools they've been using in the past, solely because that's all they knew to use. So you have these Alteryx aces, and actually in this particular case, this workflow was built by an Alteryx ace by Talos. You have this opportunity then to even tag or corral all of your workflows that are built by real true specialists, by an Alteryx ace. So then you've got other individuals as they're learning, as they're developing their skills, or as they have questions maybe around tools to use for certain purposes, that they could even go into the data catalog, perhaps type in either the name of the tool, or they could take a look at all Alteryx workflows that have been built by data meaning aces, and then come back with a list of workflows that then they can start to explore and better understand how they're being utilized by those aces. As we get into designer tools, there are details that can be further provided, certain expressions around that have been added into specific tools, so on and so forth. Now, what I'd like to do is just share a difference here. What we looked at was, as I said, was a workflow that was ingested without any other specific information added to it. There was no other annotation. Nobody came in, looked at that particular workflow after it was ingested into Connect and said, okay, I'm going to add some descriptions, I'm going to apply some tags, I'm going to do a bunch of things to make sure that there's better context and understanding around that so that other people can find it quickly and start getting the context they need. However, to give you some perspective, if I now jump over to just another tool, we see that there is information here that's going to make, that's going to provide more clarity around, the context of what that particular workflow is trying to achieve. I'm not going to dig too much into this because I realize that I'm running out of time here, but what I want to do is just again show you that off of the ingestion of this list of workflows, the other most important information that you're going to find is then also any relationships to those assets. So there might be a related business glossary term, and you can see that in this relationships diagram, which is showing you just essentially some basic lineage, which is really what are your database or your flat file inputs to your workflows, and then what are your outputs from your workflows. And then you can really sort of expand from there to then just better understand, what your data pipeline looks like and how central that workflow is to this one, data pipeline of perhaps many hundreds to thousands of data pipelines within your organization. So you're getting some clarity then around not just, what the workflow is, but how valuable the workflow is to a broader data pipeline, and then also some transparency to just how likely a data pipeline might be impacted if, for example, this customer full table were to change at any point. And so we can see that information too. Another piece of information that can be very quickly gleaned from within Alteryx Connect is, as you ingest your workflows, as you ingest your data sources, and as you see this automatic lineage, anybody can come in, let's say a data consumer who is utilizing this Alteryx insight, group sales by county, and they would like to, so let's say, let's put a focus around group sales by county, for example, right? they've been utilizing that heavily, and they really want to ask a question: how likely is it that there have been, adjustments or changes, or how likely is it that the data sources that are feeding this are certified and endorsed and are deemed of a high enough quality? So you can get that information pretty quickly. We can just basically work our way further upstream of that particular insight report so that we can get a better understanding. Okay, so I see that there is a data quality workflow that is providing specific inputs, maybe some cleansing and some profiling that's being done before that, workflow provides some transformations for insights. We've got, these specific databases and data tables that are feeding those workflows. So those are just very simply your inputs, right? And then what I see here is, as I hover over them, without even going into the actual asset, I can see that they are certified. Great. So this is immediately giving me information that is going to, for me as a consumer of this particular report, that's going to give me a sense of comfort and satisfaction that I have just really reviewed those upstream assets or sources and have determined that we're utilizing a level of certified assets that have met certain acceptance criteria by a central body, so I can move on with making decisions off of those insights. So this is where we get down into trust. All right, so we've discovered this. We've covered discoverability, we've covered understanding, we've covered trust in terms of ensuring that certain assets are certified. I'm not going to get into how we go about certifying assets. There's certainly ways of having certifiers do that, but that's not for this particular webinar. And then we've also covered reuse. And the reuse bit is quite obviously, if I, as an individual, have a need to utilize the same asset, first things first is I'm going to just type in a specific keyword, and when I type in that keyword within the catalog, I'm going to be fronted with my top results. I can see that this particular workflow is certified, i.e. it's trusted, it's endorsed by a central governance group. I'm going to click into that. Then I'm going to see more information, gives me context. And then I could very simply say, great, I'm going to open this up and I'm going to use it then for my own purposes. So what that does is, if I have access to the to the gallery, which I should, then I have the opportunity either to download it if the author has provided permission for that, or I can reach out to the author and just simply ask a few further questions. And how do I do that? I can go into my comments here, give feedback or ask questions, and then I can simply say, hey, is this the right workflow for figuring out sales by county? Now I have the opportunity to save that, and the notification is going to go immediately to Tars, who's the owner. I could also then potentially bring others into the group. I can just start providing sort of this quick @ symbol, and then I can also ask other individuals, or I can ask other groups. Now I save that off. Not only is Tyler's going to get notification now, but then Sean is also going to get notification of that question. And then of course, the collaborative, conversations and feedback and so forth continue on. Now they continue in the platform. They are saved in the platform. So there's always this steer back to the platform so that people can kind of go back in and further answer questions or provide additional information directly on the platform. Now there is also an opportunity, and this is where I want to get into talking about the idea of to-dos. And this is not well known within Alteryx Connect, is that there's this little tiny bell right here, and if I click on that bell off of the question or the feedback that I provided, now I can choose to very quickly assign it to me as well. But let's just say that I want to ask AK and I want to ask Sean to do something. And let's say that there's been a request that's been provided. So now I hit add, and what occurs now is that each individual, myself, Sean, and AK, have a to-do on their list on the platform. So when they log in, they're going to see the same thing as me, which is this little bell with a red badge at the top, and you can see the number of tasks on my list. If I click on that, I can now see what are the tasks for me versus the tasks that are by me. So I've assigned a bunch of tasks to individuals in the past. Now, as each individual checks the box, they either answer the question or they resolve the task. Let's say I just asked them to add a description to a certain table or to a certain workflow. I have the ability as the requester to track this on a recurring basis. And then as those individuals close those out or resolve them, then they can check the box. And once they check the box, it just drops off the list. Now I've got one in here. I could actually go back in. I could provide a description, like essentially a comment before I apply it, or I could very simply, hit this task is resolved. If it's something as simple as, hey, I just added a description, maybe I don't need to, add any additional comments to that. And then the requester can go back in and see, yep, he says it's resolved. I've gone in and I see that there is a description there. So this is now really where you're encouraging your collaboration, but then you're also getting an opportunity to track those requests or to track those outstanding questions, keep it on the platform, and then ensure that you're sort of continually tracking to those without having to track them offline or track them in some other way. So better collaboration. All right, so we've got insights, we've got better collaboration. Finally, I wanted to just show, as part of the tight integration with Alteryx Connect, the opportunities with those in your organization who have Alteryx Designer, is that if I'm starting a new workflow, again, you want that central, that BI Center of Excellence or your IT group or even a data governance group to ensure that people are utilizing the endorsed certified data sources. So to do that, you now have the opportunity for individuals to hook up their designer instances to Connect. And now without actually having to go to Connect, I can then just start to plug in my keywords directly into the search bar. Just depending on what comes back, if I type in customer, actually if we go content, then I can show you where it gets really interesting is then we also can see with the yellow ribbon that we have these endorsed or certified assets that can then be used. Right? If I want to now drag that in, that now is my input to my new workflow. It's a workflow that I know as a designer, developer that I am utilizing data inputs that are certified that meet minimum acceptance criteria. And assuming that I have access to, in this case, the Snowflake data source, I can plug in my credentials and away I go. All right, so that's one thing. And the last thing that I'm going to share as well is then the opportunity to plug directly into your H2 console. And that's fairly straightforward in the Alteryx community. There are instructions by how to go about doing that. And again, back to the whole idea of insights around your assets or insights around your around all of your data sources is that you can then just start to do simple queries directly within the H2 database, directly within your Connect underlying database to pull back information that could then feed a Tableau dashboard, or it could just be simply dumped out to an Excel spreadsheet for which somebody centrally maintains to then start pulling back some metrics around what are the top data sources that are being used across all of your Alteryx workflows and your Tableau reports. And then this is where you get the kind of information that's really going to turn the corner on the transparency, the visibility to those popular data sources that are being utilized Now, not only are you getting visibility to the popular data sources, but then you're also getting visibility to the individuals, those who are producing the assets, the workflows, and what common data sources that they are using over and over again, so that there can be a directive or a change to ensure that there is steer towards those certified, those endorsed data sources as a result. And so we've got, in data meeting, we've got an opportunity where ultimately we've built dashboards around usage within Connect, built dashboards around, pulling back information around data sources that are just simply gleaned, from all of your Alteryx workflows. What are the popular tool sets? How many macros are being utilized in any one workflow, or which of the macros are being used heavily, which are not? All of this information gives you that visibility to then really sort of drive towards this level of centralized guardrails and controls that are then going to help you really balance and start to steer every one of your self-service platform users to not just understand how to use the tool, not just understand sort of the processes, the best practices, but now to understand what data sources they need to be using going forward, where there are issues of clutter and confusion around redundancies, and where there are opportunities to then potentially leverage assets that are being utilized heavily in one department across other departments to also then build efficiencies, build better collaboration and exposure to greater insights. Okay, now I've gone a couple minutes over here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to say thank you to everybody for your time today. Really appreciate you, sort of digging in with me around self-service analytics and ways that we can sort of govern what some consider the Wild West. There are ways, particularly with Alteryx, around Alteryx Connect. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that people have as a follow-on, or share any demos with those who are interested in better balancing out the exciting movement that we have around self-service analytics and democratization of data. Thank you. Talk soon. Bye.